Hi everybody, welcome, and thanks for those presentations. God, that took me down memory lane there, Terry. I did some work with UKHO in '98, digitising notices to mariners.
Oh wow, yes, NMs. We still do a lot of those, definitely. Very important to us.
So that was fascinating. And Catherine, I was over in New York City last year, and some of the stuff you've done around joining up and helping tourists like me get around, keep it up. It's great. Cool. And Sally, good to see you, and fascinating to hear what's. I know you were doing some stuff in Essex recently, and fascinating to see how things are getting on over in Wales. And Brett, great to see that kind of that bringing that data into the mix around the whole agility piece was fantastic. I still think we have a massive challenge around data and what to do about it. We're really good at rubbish data in public sector, aren't we? And getting it better. So welcome to the session. And over the next 30 minutes, what I'll kind of do is I'll take us through a few of the key questions, just try and pull out a little bit more detail around some of the fantastic presentations that you've done there. And hopefully for the audience, we can bring to life some of those, I think, Catherine, was it difficult questions, was it? Difficult points that we can bring out, yeah?
So it's awkward questions, I think is the word you're looking for.
Yeah, awkward, thank you, yeah. So I'm going to kick off with agility and a position on where you are in your respective organisations now. Simple question, probably not a simple answer. How agile are you really? And how agile do you want to be? So if I start with you, Sally.
Okay, so the Centre for Digital Public Services is a new organisation. We started in June, but it was, as I said in the presentation, it was formed because we had done a fairly extensive discovery about not just how agile is the Welsh public sector, but what kind of skills and capability, leadership and all these things. So I would say that as Catherine, really interested in your questions you're asking. We started off asking people about how digital you are. Do you have a digital strategy? And quite often we had to reel it back quite a lot because we needed to explain what we meant by digital. So I would say that, and that's not uncommon, but it is perhaps a bit of a presumption that people would understand what digital. I think even us, all of us digital folks, struggle with trying to explain what digital is. And I know Tom Loosemore had a really good definition about processes and governance, etc. So I would say, with regards to what we our intention and what we want to do, is explain and articulate and have a kind of Welsh articulation of what we mean by digital, what we mean by agile, and all these things that we're talking about, and technology. So I think there is a long way to go in the Welsh public sector, and that's why we were set up. There's a lot of enthusiasm, but I think it's really important to explain what you mean by it. You know, what does it mean? And I don't need to go through it again in my presentation, but the kind of different types of agile, the methodology, the organizational needs to be agile, and also agile cultures. So I would say there's some good stuff happening in Wales. We need to ramp it up. The centre is there to amplify all the good work, but also support people to understand what it means and give them the support to help them do and be an agile organisation.
Great, thanks very much. And Terry, your views of what's happening in UKHO?
Okay, so yeah, so kind of around agile, I think actually within Sally's presentation, I think she hit it on the mark for me around agile, kind of uppercase A and lowercase a. So, you know, talking about uppercase being certainly ways of delivery teams delivering, but then the lowercase a, certainly for me, kind of more about flexibility of an organization to actually be able to flex and pivot, I suppose, in a changing direction, as we've all seen over the past kind of, 6 or 8 months or so. I think that flexibility for us is something that we're pretty good at. You know, we every organization, obviously you're on a different curve, but for us, I think the fact that we have the delivery teams, they're working really, really well, working cross portfolio. We have everything kind of lined up. I think they're working really well as far as that collaboration piece kind of goes in, as you were saying, Catherine, around kind of the teams showing that work as well, rather than just, it's a classic kind of agile manifesto piece. You kind of, not having kind of, large documentation of it, just showing the thing as such. And I think the teams have really come on in that respect in the last couple of years. So for us as an organization, I would say we are very agile, but also quite flexible in how we do things as well. And I think that's the key for us, having that flexibility in there. And within that, of course, that open communication the whole time across the piece. Whereas before, traditionally silos perhaps. It's actually let's everyone just talk to each other, and actually things move a lot faster in that respect.
Oh, excellent, great. And Catherine?
Yeah, awesome. It's always easier when people have already given you all the definitions. So absolutely, I think the small a, big A point is an excellent one. Also the fact that, talking about Agile is about, more than 10 years old at this point. And so I think it is important to define what we mean by Agile, because if not, you end up, I find in government, many people will say they're doing Agile, and sort of to Sally's point, well, is it big A, is it small a, and how Agile? And also, does it matter? It often doesn't matter, but in some cases it does when you think you're talking about the same thing and you're actually not. So to answer the question for New York, I'll take a quick step back to define what it is we do in the Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officer. So we exist to help make New York future ready, and there's 4 parts of our office. We do inclusive innovation, universal broadband, tech policy, and then the digital services portfolio. So as our office, just as the Mayor's Office of the CTO, very agile organization. The people on the digital services team could write you entire essays about pros and cons of small a or big A Agile. But that doesn't actually particularly matter, because the point of our office is to support those agency partners within the New York City government and also other mayoral offices. So when we think about Agile, it's not just if we're doing something on our own and building it in an Agile manner, but also how are we working with partners and how are we taking them on the journey, and how do they want to participate in an Agile process? I spoke briefly in my presentation about just the disruptive aspects. And it's true that doing Agile work is disruptive. You might produce work or increments of work faster than people are expecting to see. And then now you're showing the work and you're asking for feedback on this work. And to Sally's point, for organizations where maybe they're less familiar working with digital, they might not know how to respond to the work that you've produced and the feedback that you're asking for. So our office itself is quite agile, but I think most of our engagements with other agencies are at various levels of agility. And certainly we'd always like to be as agile as we can. But I think it's important to look beyond just the technology aspect, but also looking at that wider governance bit.
No, that's good. And something I want to build out a bit more on with all of us is around that multi-agency Agile and where that comes. And going into that, Brett, really interested in hearing your views around not just your organization, but when you interact with clients and the pain and pleasure around that. Carry on.
Yeah. I think probably one of the really interesting parts from the strategy role that I play internally is you realize very quickly that no strategy survives that first engagement, first contact with the enemy, or in this case, the enemy being reality. And so the agility on the little a. So when we talk about agility, it's about how we can refine the tactics, refine the decisions that we're making around the strategy. So we're all heading in the same direction, but we know that we want to do minor course corrections rather than get to the end of a half or the end of a fiscal and suddenly realize that actually we have major work to do, and we've spent a lot of time heading in slightly off course, and we've ended up a lot further away from where we wanted to be than we'd like to. I think Catherine's question around, and absolutely a leading question, but I love it, around do you plan to do less of this next year than you did this year, is spot on. And that's what agility is trying to get to, is how do we do more next year than this year, given we're probably not going to get all that much more resources and manpower and investment. So agility is about, what are we doing today to make sure that we can deliver on those expectations next year? For us internally, that's about asking new questions and how fast can we, when somebody is curious and needs to deep dive or asks a new question, how fast can you get it? Because I think the easy wins from decisions that require one source of data or that require a quarterly update is gone. And so it's about getting rich context to inform decisions.
That's really good. And just building on that and some of the other stuff, I want to dive into something I know everybody asks this, and it's kind of a topic that people kind of, you ever hear that phrase in meetings, let's take it offline? No, let's deal with it. Yeah, that one. So I want to get into, Sally, around how do you overcome inaction those icebergs that you hit around this stuff, and how do we then build the business case for change around agility? So it'd be good to get your views on those two challenges.
So, so I've been pretty much an independent consultant for the past 20 years. And so my job title's been things like transformation director or digital director. It started off with transformation director, so kind of that old. At the beginning, it was really explaining sort of fundamentally what you meant by digital, and a service design wasn't even a word, and there was, there was a lot of language that wasn't available there. So I kind of built up my resilience, my resistance, my patter from a very early age, because at the time I was explaining something that was really quite new, that would have a massive impact. But the important thing that I hope I've retained throughout my career is explaining what that impact is. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can do, who people who want to make change, is to explain what is that going to mean for that individual. Because we've got to remember, we can talk about organisational wide, but people very much will spring back into, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for my job? What does it mean for my team? So having the kind of big wide, we're going to do digital transformation for this organisation, and this is what it's going to do X, Y, and Z. And I think even if we were explaining what the impact would be on residents, that would be good. We don't always do that, but quite often it is, this will be the impact on the finances. We're going to save loads of money because we're going to go digital, but it doesn't talk about the individual, whether it's the resident, whether it's the partner of the organisation, and whether it's the individual public sector worker. So in order to do the change, in order to make things a little more easy, and it's still blinking hard every single day, but there are little windows where things start to move, and obviously they can bounce back quite quickly, but it is to explain what it means. Case studies, we don't use enough of that. Government is really quite mature on delivering service design, delivering kind of reshaping their organisation so they can deliver services. I mean, they've got a long way to go, but there's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of information about it. So what does it mean? The finance bit, you do need to explain that, but what does it mean to our residents? What does it mean to our people? And make sure you get that patter right. And if you're coming into an organisation, explain what you're doing there. And what your purpose is and what you're trying to achieve.
Right, thanks, Sally. And Terry, so in action, business cases, as you get over those two humps.
So overcoming inaction, I think Sally, again, she got it right, right on the nail there, around, kind of understanding what's in it for the person as such. So, empathy in that respect. If something's happening, you'll understand, well, actually, what does it mean for that team? What does it mean for that group of people? And how are their lives going to get better in that respect, as opposed to, oh, actually, we're going to do these changes and your life's going to get much worse and your job's going to get harder. That's not ideal for anyone at all. So it's about kind of having the empathy, understanding where those people are coming from, and actually kind of making sure that they're on board. And it is that classic, if you're developing something, if you're working on something, show the thing, show what's being done, get them involved in it from the very, very beginning. Don't wait like 6-8 months to do a ta-da, and they're like, that doesn't work for us. We've all been talking about that for the last hour or so, around making sure everyone's involved. You have that collaboration piece, and I think if you involve people from the beginning, that will help remove that inaction piece. As far as kind of building a business case for change, I think it's very much focusing, certainly for me, is focusing on the outcomes, rather than necessarily having a business case saying, over the 2 years, we're going to deliver all of these things, and this is what they're going to do. Just say, actually, after 2 years, these are the outcomes we're going to have. This is going to improve. That's going to change, but not necessarily say what it is. Give you that flexibility within that. Otherwise, we've all seen it, organizations that have these large IT programs that last 5 years and then after 4 years fail, or you have to kind of chuck more money at it because it's too expensive or too big to fail. If you kind of keep your business case to looking at outcomes, what you're hoping to achieve from that, then that gives you much more flexibility in how you can deliver that.
No, that's really good. And Catherine, also it'd be nice to get a flavour of multi-agency. I'm kind of guessing you've got that challenge in New York City as well. It'd be good to get that kind of flavour in those two questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about overcoming inaction and building the business case for change, I think if anyone is a big Twitter user like me, you may have seen the tweet yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Jane Fallow tweeted that we should have to write a business case for staying static. So I think it always positions digital as this like high risk thing of that's much more risky than not changing. And I think, you know, it's important to caveat that, because I think just in technology generally, not specifically to government, but I never want to suggest that always disrupting things is always good. I think one should always have a very critical practice and ask yourself, you know, are these changes actually improving things? But regardless, we know that as the ecosystem and environment around us is always changing, there's going to be risk in staying static. So I think risk is also a helpful way to frame it. So examples of tools that are really helpful, or things I use constantly, the 18F, that's the US government's in-house digital consultancy, they wrote an excellent de-risking guide for technology projects. And I think it's one that I share a lot with partners to talk about how you can bring in less risk to these things. Because when we talk about overcoming inaction, what we're really talking about is not fear of change because somebody can't handle the concept of change, but because they're worried about introducing too much risk. So I think balancing those risks against what is the risk of doing nothing and what is the risk of trying something new. And to the extent that we can use things like Agile to de-risk things, which is to say that sort of lean startup methodology, that hypothesis-driven testing, that we, you know, work in small increments and can quickly pivot. That's a very helpful de-risking tactic. But to some previous points, one thing that does make that challenging is that if we've set up front, here's all of the things we're going to do in the next 24 months. And then as we do it, we decide one of those things is not worthwhile, or it actually isn't the great idea that we thought it is. You can put yourself in an awkward position where, you know, people will ask, well, what happened to that thing you were working on? So in order to make the case for change, you've got to compel people and say, this is what you're going to get out of it. But that's where that power of showing and telling is, because you can say, oh, you know, we thought everybody wanted a unicorn registry. We went out and talked to unicorn owners. Turns out nobody cares. Let's not build this and let's move on. So those are some of my general thoughts.
Yeah, really good. And Brett, your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's funny where you started off the question on, how do we get past the let's take this offline? That was actually the foundation of Domo was, a CEO going, wait a minute, I run a digital analytics company. Yeah, we monitor digital decisions on websites around the world, and yet I have to wait 2 weeks when I ask a question like, how many people are working on this? What's it going to cost if we do invest here? So I think it's fascinating, and it's not unique to government. I think where we need to realize is that it does come from personal wins. We need to recognize that, the what's in it for me, and that we've tried it before and it didn't work. It is trying to say, well, what's the benefit in, where would we like to be able to get? And it's painting that picture that individuals can say, well, right now I hate the fact that I spend 4 hours a week data checking or fact checking or pulling something together to then make a decision. And it's about saying, well, what's your role in this? Is it a processor? Is your role a gatekeeper? Or are you an enabler and a shopkeeper? Where we're now starting to sort of say, well, actually, there's something positive that we can start making forward-looking decisions rather than just processing. I kind of think that's probably where I'm at. It's also about just being able to have those incremental improvements, that it's the win that people like improving. That from going from a status of we're doing the same thing to look at what we can do now, and using the last 6 months, 8 months, what month are we now, to realize that actually we've achieved an awful lot in a very short amount of time. The amount of change that happened and has been able to be delivered in 2020 has been exceptional. Let's capture that momentum. There's certain things that we need to build off, but we can also look at what's changed. What's changed is people are now familiar with how we manage risk in a fast-moving environment, and hopefully the things that we've done during this year in particular have shown that we can take a bit more risk with what we're doing.
And just building on that and building on the business case piece, and you're right, I mean, I'm a massive fan of use case studies. I think, we're woefully poor at using those. I think that they speak 1,000 words, and we could do so much more with that to evidence. But one of the other big challenges, one of the things often thrown at Agile, scaling. Do MVP, you do alpha, beta. How do you get out of beta? How do you scale? So the question I'm going to throw it to yourself first, Terry, is how do we scale? How do we give Agile, the people get the, if you like, the confidence into people that Agile can truly scale, and your thoughts around that?
Yeah, and that is often a tricky one. Certainly around, so the approach that we take is we've worked with an IBM framework as such, which we're calling the Agile Delivery Governance Framework, which in essence is actually quite similar, but a little bit different to the UK Government Digital Services kind of approach there. So we have a guide, trust, verify. So very much kind of putting those kind of guide rails in place for teams to work from. We trust them to get on with that work, and then at the end actually kind of do that verification of what they've done and how they do that. And as part of those verifications, we work to principles which are pretty much the same as the Government Digital Services principles about how you deliver, and actually how you set kind of the tech infrastructure up as well, which a very really important part of that kind of underpinning of that digital kind of piece as well. So for us, it's about making sure we have the right principles in place from the very beginning. But of course, and that's often a challenge, is if you are at that initial stage, at that alpha stage, you show what you're doing to a lot of people, and they're like, oh my God, it's almost there. And so actually, no, we're stopping that, we're throwing that away, and we're gonna do something else. And they're like, no, you can't, it's almost there. It's like, well, actually, there's nothing beneath it. There's nothing under there. It's not gonna work, it's not gonna scale. So it's about helping people understand how all those stages work. And I think also one of the key things for us, which is a little bit of a bugbear of mine as well, is, we're past the stage now where you can have a senior manager saying, I don't understand technology, or I don't understand digital. Those days need to be gone. The challenge is, it's partly their fault, but it's mostly our fault for not helping them on that journey, for not helping them understand, So I think for me, helping all senior managers and leaders understand actually what digital is and what it means to people and how it can kind of work would then help with that kind of scaling overall of anything that you deliver.
Yeah, and actually on that one, is it tolerant? Will people tolerate? I'm a director and I don't understand finance. I'm a director, I don't understand diversity. No, really. It's kind of get over it and move it on. And by the way, how do you do your shopping at home? How do you keep in touch with family? But I could go on for hours on that. Sally, your views around how do we get scale into this stuff?
By, I think from the outset, making it everybody's not problem, but everybody's opportunity. So, although it's a problem. So what happens is, and what has always happened is, this Agile stuff's going to happen in the IT or stroke digital department if they've kind of got that advanced. And to scale it, you have to quite often, you've done all your fun stuff, you've built something good, and people are touching it, feeling, saying this is good, but then you have to spend your time, and sometimes a huge amount of time, with your finance director, with your policy director, with your chief operating officer, if you're lucky to have one, to explain, okay, this is where we want to take it next. So I think in order to be able to scale, we need to see service design, we need to see agility, we need to see evidence-based decision making as something that the whole organisation needs to support, champion and adopt from the very highest level. I think that when recently I set up a conversation with the chief exec of an organisation, and he said, great, I'll invite my finance director as well as my digital program manager to that meeting. And I was like, wow, I don't need to ask for it. So that's when we actually start seeing that it's a whole organisation responsibility and a whole organisation responsibility to champion it as well.
Yeah, that's really good. And Brett, your view around this?
Yeah, I think it's about what has changed. How we scale it is the innovation step, that first step can start factoring in how this scales. So obviously there's much bigger questions around service design and implementation when it affects people's and job roles. When I come at it from a systems point of view and a data point of view, is that 10 years ago, and it really was 10 years ago, you used to have to stand up these pilots on servers literally under somebody's desk in a department, because that was the only infrastructure that was required. And when we were looking for data for how do we prove this thing out so that we can give a little bit of evidence and put a bit of weight behind the business case, it was spreadsheets and it was offline files, and they were pulled from ERP systems manually, which meant that it was never going to scale, because as soon as you had proven value, you then had to start from scratch again to say, well, now we need to make sure it's connected, because quarterly is not a cadence that's going to benefit the business. And we need this to scale that people can use it, and people can use it at scale, and it needs to be able to break across walls within our organization. That's changed. So when we look at systems now and data now, I think regardless of what the problem is, we can now start saying, well, when we're going to build a pilot, how do we make sure that this does scale and we can just roll it out, and that it's not just built for technical people? There's a lot of low code options out there. There's a lot of very consumer friendly technology that doesn't look like the old Access database interface that people get scared of, because you can break those things. So I think it's about providing that confidence in saying we can do things smart by design from the start. Pick your partners, but realize what the gates are, and then don't rush to scale too quickly. I think it's putting the guardrails around to say, we do need to start building the confidence of people that the data's right, the decisions are meaningful, and it's hopefully adopting the sort of more enthusiastic parts of the organization and building on that credibility before you then deploy at scale, because you don't want the people who are white-anting progress when it fails the first time in front of everybody. So build up that credibility.
Yeah, great. And Catherine, your world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's more than one way to do it, and I think part of it depends on what is your sort of theory of change, or the way in which you're trying to work with your organization. So looking around the world, I think different digital governments have come up with different ways of doing this, amongst those who have done it, and in many cases, a lot of folks haven't done it yet. So I think the first thing is, to a certain extent, it's a solved problem. Whether you want to look at something like the GDS approach, whether you want to go and look at how Spotify has scaled Agile teams. I mean, people have done this work before. I think what we're talking about in government is usually the governance structure. And one of the, going back to the question of overcoming inertia, one of the challenges is, if you are the digital person doing the digital things, when you start talking about changing governance structures, people are like, hey now, we did not ask for this. We asked for a widget or an app. And so I think that is where it goes again back to your theory of change, is where is your organization in terms of conceptualizing that? If you're a progressive digital leader, and when I say that, I'm referencing Lisa Welchman's work, who's a leading thinker in digital governance. And she sort of uses a type of digital maturity model. But amongst those leaders who are more progressive to, and I forget whose point it was about finance, actually, David, I think it was yours, you wouldn't have a decision-making table with on key important decisions with a total absence of a finance angle and someone with those finance expertise. And similarly, and actually it's interesting you use that example, because I often use the finance one, that we're not asking for everyone in government to suddenly be the world's greatest digital person, in the same way that not every single person needs to be able to plot regression analysis. But we do expect a certain amount of financial literacy, and similarly, we need to have a certain amount of digital literacy, and then certainly at decision-making tables, a strategic digital angle. So all this to say that there's different ways of doing it, and ultimately it comes down to what is the appetite or the openness in the organizational culture that you're in to having these discussions. But the idea that it's not a solved problem, I think, is one to get away from, to demonstrate through the use of case studies and exemplars that this can be done. But you do need some champions who are open to that, because if not, people might frame your work as, you are just the digital people, I don't know why you're talking to us about governance.
Yeah, that's really good. And just actually we've got one more point, and just kind of a takeaway from each of you, because that digital mindset piece, and what I'd like from each of you is just, what's your one top takeaway for the audience around how you change the mindset and bring digital to the heart of the organization? It's only a small question, Terry.
Okay, that didn't give me much thinking time at all there. I was going to say, really, I suppose, about changing the mindset, but I suppose it's knowing that technology and digital isn't the answer. You know, it's not going to give that magic solution. And I think we've all been kind of saying that as well, is around actually is looking back at what are the processes, what is the governance, rework those. Don't try and overlay something on top. You know, non-exec director would say lipstick on the pig. You know, don't just try and put an extra layer on top to smooth things over. Actually sort out what your problem is underneath everything. And I think by showing the benefits that will bring, the outcomes that will bring, that's how you bring people on board and along on that journey as well, and share as you go all the time.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Terry. Sally?
All that Terry said, an organisational approach. But I'm just going to chuck one thing in that we haven't talked about, and we don't talk about very often, is stopping things. Organisations are very frightened about stopping things. They think there's a massive risk in stopping things, but the risk is in not stopping them, because you are not going to, but you're clogged up. Your people are clogged up. They're distracted and are not focused. So getting the business involved and having the confidence, I think, to move forward, but also to be able to stop.
Yeah. Should I mention track and trace Mark 1 there?
No.
Brett, your thoughts?
I think it is about getting the people involved, that you can show wins, both by use case of what government's achieved today. And you know, what's nice is you can look globally for some fascinating results that we've managed to achieve, but that you can also very quickly stand up something that does show results very quickly and is tangible. And that should hopefully set a bit of a course for what does agility look like, and what does innovation look like within our organization as the next step. This doesn't need to be massive change. You don't have to be planning for 2050 just yet. Digital improvement and agility means that we're making better decisions each step. Hopefully we're shortening the time between each of those decisions, but we're heading in the right direction.
Excellent. And last comment from yourself, Catherine.
Thank you. Yeah, so get the most senior possible person into user research sessions as quickly as possible. So we've had the Secretary of Cabinet come in. I've had digital ministers come in. We had a New York City mayor read quotes from a user research session at a press briefing. Getting the most senior person involved in the user research is incredibly powerful, partly because it helps everybody else get involved. And by that, I mean, if somebody says they don't have time to come to watch one 30-minute user research session, and you can point out the Secretary of Cabinet already did it last week, it's a very compelling argument. And the reason that that's important is because pathos is stronger than logos. So the emotional response of people watching real users go through an actual tool is going to be way more powerful than a 4-page briefing on the value of the tool. So the faster you can get people invested in that, the faster you're going to get them excited about your work.
Yeah, and absolutely, top decision maker to the people they're there to serve. Bring the two together. Excellent. So thank you for that. Really good set of conversations. Hopefully our audience has got some really good stuff to take away there. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Terry. And thank you, Brett, for really engaging through that session. And everybody else, enjoy the rest of the event. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.